Introduce yourself, Nick.
Okay. Hey everybody, I'm Nick Galante. I am the Information Literacy and Technical Services Librarian here at the Cressman Library. And it's Banned Book Week 2023. Banned Book Week this year runs from October 1st, so I'm recording this on the 2nd, so it started yesterday, goes through the end of the week, the 7th. This is an observance that happens every year. It's organized by the ALA, the American Library Association, and it's designed to bring awareness to the fact that books are being banned and challenged every day. Each year the American Library Association records challenges made to books across the country. They compile them. They release statistics on how often books are banned, which books are banned and challenged, why they are being challenged, where they are being challenged, who is challenging them. All of this information is available on the ALA website. Each year they also release the top 10 most frequently banned and challenged of the year. I have this graphic next to me. This past year there were actually top 13 because I don't know how well you can see on the camera. There were actually several ties. There was a two-way tie for 5th place and a three-way tie for 10th place. Three-way? Four-way, excuse me.
I'm zooming in slowly. It's going to be a little blurry, everyone, but I'm going to zoom in.
My colleague Nicole Rivera behind the camera making sure that this is actually working.
Yes, so it's a little blurry, but I will put an image up within the video too.
And as I said, all of this is available on the ALA website. I strongly encourage everybody to go check it out if you're not familiar with it already. Because one of the things that is so important about Banned Book Week is to raise awareness that this is happening and to shed some light on what books are being banned and challenged and why they're being banned and challenged. Because often when people hear, a lot of times people are aware that books are banned, that books are challenged, but it's an abstract idea. They don't often have an understanding of what that looks like. And people are often really surprised by some of the titles. I've got two notable examples here on my left. I've got Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls and Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. Both frequently banned and challenged in the past. Both classic works of American literature that might not spring to mind if you try to answer the question, what books tend to get banned?
So why do we want to have this discussion?
Why do we want to have this discussion?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's important to understand what voices are being silenced. Because that's what banning books is about. It's about restricting information. It's about restricting what voices get heard, what information is accessible to the public. And we as librarians feel that it's our job to not pass judgment on that information, just to help you access that information that you're looking for. It's not so much whether that information is good or bad, but to censor information is kind of counterintuitive to what it means to be a librarian. That's my perspective on it. That's the ALA's official stance on it. And I know it's the perspective of a number of my colleagues in the field. I don't want to speak for everyone, but...
We are meant to be unbiased.
Exactly. We are unbiased.
Mm-hmm. Why may things be banned and challenged specifically? So common themes.
So most of the time, the reason books get banned and challenged is because somebody finds something in them objectionable. Sort of a blanket statement that doesn't really answer a lot, I know. It can be for the reasons that you expect: violence, sexual content, the presence of a political or religious ideology that people disagree with or find objectionable. Over the last, I want to say, 6 years now, I think it's since 2017, 2016, so 6 or 7 years now, overwhelmingly a major cause of objection, a major reason the books get banned and challenged is the presence of LGBTQ plus content. And if you were to look at certainly the top 13 of last year, I think more than half of them are listed for that reason. And I believe the upper half of it, these top 6 right here, all have LGBTQ content. So clearly issues discussing anything related to the LGBTQ community is for some people considered objectionable, offensive, inappropriate for certain groups of people, whatever it happens to be. And you can find a whole number of reasons that books are banned or challenged in the past. Actually, we're going to be having a social media post coming out tomorrow, so the 3rd, that lists some of the more surprising reasons that books have been banned or challenged. Some unusual ones that I think are going to surprise a lot of people.
So just looked up Cedar Crest College, Crestman Library, and on our website we have all our social media listed underneath our phone number.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We have too many to say the name, and they all have different names, but they all say
Yes, but there are
Crestman
links
Library.
on the Crestman Library website.
So part of the fun, since I'm behind the camera, is I get to ask the questions that's in the jar. And as you see, there's a lot in here.
Nicole has compiled some questions from faculty, staff, and students that they would like answered about Banned Book Week, and I am here to be the Banned Book Week guru. So
Yes.
go ahead, Nicole, what have we got?
As much as Nick denies it, he is our expert and very knowledgeable in books.
I am
So,
passionate about it.
First question. Why are white, in parentheses, classics still being used to teach?
Oh, we're getting beyond just banned books, we're getting into the idea of the literary canon now. I think the simple answer for that is that because they've always been. People are resistant to change. You know, you're taught the books that you were taught. And most people watching this, think back to the books that you were taught in high school, college, whatever. How much, what percentage of them were written by white men? Probably most of them, if not all of them. Maybe there was Ralph Ellison was in there, or Jane Austen, or you have some isolated examples of women or minorities being represented, but overwhelmingly, the literary canon has been white men, and that is changing, but it's a work in progress, and it's slow, and we're not there yet, so it's hard for me to speak to what every English professor and English teacher throughout the country is doing, but I think it's just inertia. It's changing, but it's going to take a little while.
And which an example of that would be To Kill a Mockingbird, which also happened to be banned and challenged.
Yeah, frequently banned and challenged, yes. To Kill a Mockingbird is very frequently banned and challenged.
And it is still taught in high schools and colleges.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there an alternative to some classics that you would suggest?
Oh, yes.
For
I mean,
teaching?
there are exhaustive lists of books that people have recommended over the years that could supplement, replace, provide a more nuanced perspective or a more enlightened perspective than these classics. Actually, I'm going to plug one of our research guides. Cedar Crest, if you go to the Crestman Library website, one of the links on the side is research guides. Click that. I have a research guide on teaching problematic literature. That is a whole list of classic works of literature that are considered problematic for their racial content or sexist content, whatever. And I have a list of books that can be used to potentially supplement the discussions in there. So just to go with To Kill a Mockingbird, for example, phenomenal work of American literature, seminal coming-of-age story. Has some problematic racist content. Fantastic supplement to that is The Hate You Give. Deals with very similar themes, but it puts people of color at the center of discussions of race rather than To Kill a Mockingbird, which focuses on white characters talking about race.
And then another plug we can put in is we do have a banned and challenged book research
do.
guide
Speaking
as
of
well
research guides.
as an alternative if you don't want to look at teaching problematic.
Yes, the Banned and Challenged research guide is also excellent.
So why are books continually singled out for banning when other forms of media, such as shows, movies, and music, don't receive nearly as much?
Well, for this, I'm going to refer to statistics from the ALA for this. The overwhelming targets of these challenges, where we are recording these challenges taking place, is in public libraries and schools. So while yes, everything has been challenged. The ALA has data on this. Films, databases, online reference, online articles, everything is challenged. But it is overwhelmingly books because when you walk into a library, what do you see primarily? books. That's what people are going to libraries for still overwhelmingly. That is what is seen on the shelves overwhelmingly. And not to say that films and other media aren't being challenged, but the primary focus of most library collections is books. And so the primary focus of these challenges still remains books. I think that's probably the simplest explanation for it. There's plenty of boycotts of films, TV, websites, etc. that happen. It's just the American Library Association's not tracking that as frequently.
What are the guidelines for a banned/challenged book?
As far as what book gets banned and challenged,
Or how?
how?
Or what reasonings?
Okay.
And things like that.
Well, I guess I've been using these terms interchangeably. I guess this is a good time to make that distinction between banned and challenged books. Because the ALA lumps them together. So a challenged book is anything that has had a complaint lodged against it for any reason. No action actually has to be taken, but a complaint has been made. As long as that happens, that book has been challenged. A ban is obviously the removal of it from curriculum, from a shelf, whatever. But for the sake of their statistics, the ALA does not distinguish between whether something has gotten all the way to a ban or if it's just been challenged. As far as guidelines, there's no rhyme or reason. We've talked about some reasons that people might object to the content of a book, but there's no formal procedure for making a challenge. You don't go through the ALA or anything. It's just, it could be a letter sent to a library, it could be an email, it could be just walking up to the desk at the library and saying, hey, I have a problem with this material. There's not any sort of formalized process for it. And as I've mentioned, and as the guides that we've mentioned and will be available on our social media in the coming days will show, everything gets banned and challenged for a variety of reasons that sometimes are hard to explain.
So it expands into that question, because we do not have an expansion to that. So I'm going to add
That's
one.
fine. You are welcome to improvise and add based on what I say.
Is there any category or reason that has surprised you the most? I gave you a toughie.
Yeah. I mean, I have my favorites that I like going to, which generally are the funny ones.
Okay, so which categories or reasons do you think?
The one that I always like to mention for people that I think surprises people is one of the most frequently banned and challenged books of the last 20 years is Dave Pilkey's Captain Underpants series. And the reason Captain Underpants has been banned and challenged so frequently in the past, in fact, Dave Pilkey has made the top 10 list more years than almost any other author. And the only person who beats him is Sherman Alexie. I'd have to check on that, though. Don't hold me to that. But the reasons that Captain Underpants gets frequently banned and challenged is because of violence, the belief that it encourages children to defy authority, and the presence of toilet humor. Anybody who's read Captain Underpants knows that the violence is over-the-top, cartoonish, kind of like the old Adam West Batman where somebody throws a punch and a big pow appears on the screen. It's not gratuitous in any way. You'd find more violence in a Bugs Bunny cartoon. As far as the toilet humor goes, Captain Underpants is not the reason kids like toilet humor. Kids are going to like toilet humor. Kids like toilet humor, and so they like Captain Underpants. It does not introduce them to toilet humor. It does not make that toilet humor any worse. It's just something that is kind of dumb. Like the content of Captain Underpants, it's not an intellectual book. It's dumb, stupid, slapstick, immature humor. But on the spectrum of things that could be potentially harmful to children, it just feels so low.
Next question, which I guess happened to fall coincidentally, is which author has the most banned books to date?
Okay, I mentioned Pilkey. He's one of them. So actually, there are two ways that I could answer that question. I'm going to do both of them. So the most frequently banned and challenged author in American history is Toni Morrison. Song of Solomon, right here next to me. It's actually The Bluest Eye is her most frequently banned and challenged book.
Which is on the top.
Which is on the top 10. It's number, what is
3.
it? It's number 3 for last year. But all of her other works have been targeted in the past. Toni Morrison is the most frequently banned and challenged author in American history. Dave Pilkey's up there. Maya Angelou is also up there. The other way that I can answer that question is Judy Blume has had more individual books challenged, and more individual books reach the top 10 than any other author. But as far as just number of challenges, there are several authors that beat her. But Blume has more individual works challenged.
And for people who may not remember that name or recognize it, can you provide examples of books?
Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret is probably her biggest one. Lubber, I believe, is another one of hers. I think she's one called Forever. I'm blanking on some of her other ones, but I think she's had 5 or 6 books make it to the top 10 over the years.
In which we will put those on the stream, that way
Wonderful.
people can see them.
So that I can even supplement me just talking.
Yeah. Next question. Ooh, what was the first book ever banned and why?
Well, I can't tell you why, but I can basically say that books have been banned and challenged probably since books existed. I mean, you think back to, as far as the ALA's records are concerned, the ALA started keeping track in the early 80s. But book bans go way, way beyond that. There's plenty of examples throughout history of countries around the world banning and challenging books.
Or even cities doing
Or
book
even
bans.
individual cities doing like book bans, individual libraries doing book bans. You have instances like even go back a couple hundred years and you have, stuff being censored for indecency. Jonathan Swift in the 1700s was famously censored for being indecent. There's plenty of instances throughout history. Basically, as long as people have been publishing, there have been people wanting to censor the written word. So it's impossible for me to say what the very first book ever banned was. I don't think there's a record of the first time it happened. And why? Because somebody didn't like it, because somebody found it objectionable, for the same reason the books are banned and challenged today. But what the specific reasons for that were, I couldn't even begin to guess.
So we've talked about censoring, we've talked about banning. Has there ever been extremes to that? So not just stopping at banning, but also doing more.
I mean, book burnings have been a thing for centuries. Authors have been arrested, persecuted. I'm sure they've even been executed in the past because people didn't like what they were writing. Granted, I think you'd have to go back a while to... Well, actually, no, you don't have to go back a while to find somebody who would be executed for their writings. Just last year, there was an attempt on Salman Rushdie's life. Salman Rushdie, author of the Satanic Verses, has had a fatwa on him since the 80s? Maybe even earlier, maybe the 70s. The Ayatollah of Iran put a fatwa on it, basically a bounty, a religiously sanctioned bounty on Salman Rushdie's head for the publishing of the Satanic Verses. And over the years, there have been several attempts on his life. So yeah, that is definitely an example of, that's about as extreme as you can get, I think. Yeah, Rushdie was, I think it was about a year ago, he was stabbed on stage at a public speaking event. He was in serious condition for a while. He did pull through. He's still alive, but yeah.
Oh, there's a long one. I'm going to make you read it.
Okay. Is the statement, "It's a product of its time," a valid excuse or defense for the racism and misogyny that is often found in classic literature? If it is a valid excuse or defense of the past, then does that not imply we have all overcome our prejudices in the present? For most, any classic novel that may be said to be a product of its time, is it not possible to find another contemporary and classic author of the same time that would not need to be defended or excused? Wow, that's like 3 or 4 questions in one.
In which, if no one believes us, this is how long it is.
It's quite long. So, I mean, part of that, I mentioned the problematic literature research guide that we have. I actually answer that to a certain extent on that website, on that research guide, rather.
So let's start with part 1.
Yeah.
It's product of its time. That's
I
a
mean,
two-sided coin.
I don't think it's as much of an excuse as it is something that we have to acknowledge about old literature. I think part of the problem, part of the reason that a lot of literature is seen as problematic is because we look at it through a modern lens. So we look at, let me think of a good example. Charles Dickens or Dostoevsky have both been described as being anti-Semitic in their writing. And sure, by our modern standards, absolutely. Dickens' description of Fagin is really, really anti-Semitic. I think Fagin is explicitly referred to as Jewish, too, so it's not just, I drew this caricature from anti-Semitic ideas. And while I'm not saying that we give Dickens a pass, it's not like, that's fine because Dickens lived 200 years ago. Part of understanding his literature is understanding the time period that he was writing in, when it would have been more acceptable. Twain, I have to mention Mark Twain for this, I feel like. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is frequently banned and challenged, has been frequently banned and challenged for decades because of the use of the N-word. In regards to Jim, one of the main characters, Huck's traveling companion. And one of the biggest criticisms leveled against Huck Finn is how dare Twain use the N-word all over the place. Twain was a product of his time, but I think it goes beyond that. It's not, it's okay because Twain was a product of his time. We don't want to give that book to 7th graders and say, just ignore this incredibly offensive word because it's 150 years old. It's, all right, you're going to see an offensive word. Here's why. Let's look at how it's being used in this book. Let's talk about why it's being used in this book. And I think that's much more beneficial to students than just, don't worry about it because it's old, or even worse, censoring it because of it. Context is incredibly important.
So you answered the 2 out of the 4 questions.
Okay, what did I miss?
Is it not possible to find another contemporary and classic author of the same time that does not need to be defended or excused?
Contemporary would be a lot harder. Like a contemporary to that author. A classic author, that would be much, much harder. Because even somebody, to continue with Twain, Twain pokes fun at a lot of the racist ideas that were really, really common in his time. You see in Huck Finn, you have a lot of characters being awfully racist toward Jim. But the way that Twain characterizes Jim and has him shown as a character go far beyond all of the ways that everybody around him is treating him, with the exception of Huck. Huck loves Jim and grows to become very, very close with him over the course of the novel. So in that regard, Twain is doing better than a lot of his contemporaries. And finding somebody that would have been contemporary with Twain that does even better, is it possible? Probably. Would it be really, really difficult to find that combination of incredibly forward-thinking and have the same level of literary merit? That's a tall order. As far as a modern author that talks about those issues better, yeah, absolutely. There's dozens that you could find that would talk about this in a more nuanced and better way than Twain does, but as far as examples from the time period, it'd be very hard.
And another thing that would make it difficult is, depending on what classic and when it was written, chances are the other authors that were writing it were doing under pseudonyms.
That's also true,
They were doing under different names.
Yeah, you can find abolitionist literature from the time that Twain was writing that talked about these issues in better ways, but they're not literary. And they're historic artifacts. They're not works of literature that we can examine and discuss in the same way.
So next question.
Yeah.
Do different countries have different banned books that are banned and challenged books?
Yes. Oh, yes. As I said, there's examples throughout history. As far as modern ones offhand, I don't know. I'm sure it happens. I know there's examples, you hear of it more in cinema and TV, I think, lately, but book bans happen all over the world as well. Obviously, Nazi Germany was infamous for this. They had giant bonfires where they'd all just chuck objectionable literature into the fire and watch it burn. Soviet Russia would repress anything that was deemed... there goes Toni Morrison. Soviet Russia would repress anything that was deemed like controversial or, objectionable to within the scope of like their communist dogma. Actually, one of my favorite books is an example of that. The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov is spectacular, but the whole book is just poking fun at Soviet Russia, so they repressed it for decades. But yeah, anything that anybody finds objectionable it can get banned and challenged. You can find examples all over the world.
And do keep in mind this doesn't just include fiction, because a lot of philosophers also got banned and challenged during their time.
Oh, absolutely. Anybody who says anything objectionable or unpopular gets banned or challenged.
Because the number one argument I can think of is I forget which philosopher it is, but the one that realized that the Earth rotates around the sun.
Oh, Copernicus.
Yes.
Yep, Copernicus, Galileo, all persecuted because the church didn't like what they were saying.
Mm-hmm. So
Galileo only got like formally forgiven by the church in the 90s, I think. It was way too recent.
So you mentioned the church with the philosophers.
Mm-hmm.
Would there be an argument of religious beliefs being a factor in why people would ban and challenge books?
Absolutely. I mean, most of the reasons that you get for the banning of especially fantasy books are on religious grounds. The presence of a lot of magic is often seen as endorsing witchcraft, Satanism, etc., etc. So Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, those are the two that spring to mind most prominently, but any popular work that has magic in it has been accused of being satanic.
And the next question, if you could select 3 books to unban and make required reading/teaching, what would they be?
Oh, don't ask me that. I mean, unbanned, I don't know about that. Because anytime a book is banned or challenged, it sees a surge in popularity. So, I mean, somebody tells you not to do something, what's the first thing you want to do, right? So the very notion of a book being banned and challenged, a lot of authors see it as a badge of honor. Like, all right, I'm saying something worthwhile here. I'm saying something interesting that would get people so riled up. Because if they weren't saying anything interesting, nobody would be upset about it.
So let's rephrase the question.
Yeah.
What is your top 3 banned and challenged books that you would use in your teaching?
Okay, fair enough. That's probably better. For me, at least. Otherwise, we'll be here all night.
Especially since you do teach writing and literature.
Yeah, we still might be here all night with that question. I do teach Maya Angelou. I teach an excerpt from I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings as an example of narrative writing because she was a phenomenal narrative writer. I mean, I always go to Philip Pullman. His Dark Materials is one of my absolute favorite works of fiction. It's been frequently banned or challenged in the past. I just think it's such a magical and brilliant work that I think everybody should read that. I don't know. Next question. I can sit here listing banned books all night.
I don't know. I think I would vote for The Hate You Give.
That's a good one, yeah.
As like a comparison with To Kill a Mockingbird.
That's fair, yeah.
So. But it is a tough question to answer.
Don't ask a librarian which banned book you want to read.
Professor.
The ALA has the list of the top 100 most frequently banned and challenged books of the last 3 decades. Look at any one of those list of 100s. They're all recommended reading, as far as I'm concerned.
So we have another long one.
Okay.
So I'm going to show the audience first so that they can see how long it is. And then I'm going to throw it to you.
Yeah.
Because it has a big word that I can't pronounce with my speech impediment.
Oh. So however classic a novel may be, if there are racial overtones and undertones in it, what is the value in teaching or deconstructing the racism and the xenophobia in a classic when its roots are in colonialism and white supremacy? How can librarians communicate that we are not censoring classic book when we believe there are more contemporary works for raising, racial consciousness and teaching about racial injustice? I've kind of touched on this at least somewhat already. And I don't want to get too deep into it, but I think the Teaching Problematic Literature Research Guide really engages in this really well. As Nicole and I were saying at the start, as librarians, we try to be impartial. We try to just facilitate access to information rather than pass judgment on that information. But this is a tricky moral question. Like, can you in good conscience, as a librarian, as an instructor, recommend something that you know is problematic or has something potentially upsetting in it.
Which I think a good example of this, and this is me plugging in one,
go for it.
is the discussion we had about representation in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
And the comparison of The Hobbit, because J.R. Tolkien used the hobbits as were considered anti.
No, the dwarves have their roots in anti-Semitic. That's actually a fascinating discussion. Because Tolkien anti-Semitic characters were used in dwarves pre-Tolkien. Actually, I think Wagner has that. Maybe somewhere around Wagner in his operas, the dwarves are hugely based in anti-Semitic stuff. And Wagner was anti-Semitic to a certain extent. Tolkien actually repurposed those and took all of the stuff that Wagner did and made the dwarves just awesome in his works, rather than playing into the anti-Semitic stereotypes that Wagner was doing. But yeah, I mean, the orcs for Tolkien, I think, are much more problematic because he used, for Tolkien, he drew from, like, the Mongol hordes, like Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun, as inspiration for his orcs, and obviously that has some problematic racial undertones in it.
In which we do have talked about it.
We do, yeah. On this same YouTube channel, check out our very first Nick Talk. We weren't even calling them Nick Talks at that point, on representation in Dungeons and Dragons. And our guest speaker that we have for that, Aaron Trammell, is awesome. And all of his work on this subject is spectacular. And I cannot recommend him enough.
And then from the other end of the spectrum, we also included Liz Ortiz, who is a Tom professor here, to talk about representation in general.
Yes. Despite the technical issues we had with that talk, it's awesome and I highly recommend it.
We only have 5 questions left.
Okay, let's keep it going.
I'm going to choose one of the smaller ones. Also a really long one. Why are conservatives so willing to ban books because they contain what they feel are dangerous thoughts, but don't show concern for the paper cuts they could get from the books?
What?
Is it true they least concerned about physical safety of children than Democrats? So you can break this up in any way you want, and also I did not make this up. This is literally
oh my god.
This is a warning. I did add a random assortment of people.
Yeah, at least the second half of that is somebody just trolling me. Paper cuts, oh my lord.
So, are there more conservatives or Democrats banning or challenge books in your opinion, or do you feel it is equal?
I think it tends to be more conservative, especially over the last few years. I shouldn't say this as a general blanket statement, but it tends to be more conservative individuals or groups that are focused on banning books.
And this isn't necessarily political.
No, I'm just saying, I'm not talking about like one political party over another. I'm talking about individuals, especially over the last several years when the focus has shifted almost entirely, not almost entirely, but primarily to LGBTQ issues. The types of groups that tend to find that content objectionable tend to be more conservative groups, more conservative individuals on just a personal level. I know when we hear the words conservative and liberal, they're tied inherently to politics, but I'm not using them in that context.
So how are you defining it?
I'm defining it as an ideology. Like people might consider themselves of a liberal political party and still be more conservatively minded when it comes to certain content. And it's just people who are more liberally minded, more open-minded, perhaps, let's say, more, I'm trying to think of synonyms that don't sound politically charged, and it's basically impossible.
So basically personal preference.
It's all personal preference, yeah. The idea of something being objectionable is personal preference. And part of the whole ethos of Banned Book Week is not to say that the people who want to ban books are wrong. Because the whole reason that somebody objects to a book, almost invariably, If you look at the numbers, it's children's books and young adult books, or books that are being taught in schools that are the targets of these bans, the targets of these challenges. And almost all of them are done with the rationale of, we must protect the children. So, regardless of whether or not you personally agree with what is appropriate for a child, that motivation comes from, I like to believe that motivation comes from a good place. It's just the blanket, I don't want my child reading this, so nobody should read it, is where I personally have a problem with it. But that's just me.
In which case, then it eliminates what our jobs are.
Exactly.
In having that discussion.
Yeah.
Alright, so this one definitely is, wants to see your vibe check, I would say.
Alright, I'm so confused now.
So, are band books more jazz or blues in style? Or would you say an alternative music style?
I think that depends on the author. I don't think banned books fall into one category. You've got everything from Toni Morrison to Dave Pilkey to Ernest Hemingway to the Bible. Like, what would you classify any of that as? You can't lump, because book bans and book challenges are so varied and so across the spectrum of literature, I think you can't classify them as one thing or another.
In which I think that one is more in the sense of music styles that were banned and challenged throughout time. So at one point, blues was a really big issue as well as jazz.
Blues, rock and roll, jazz, metal, different pop musicians,
And usually for the same reason that books are.
Yeah. Well, somebody think of the children. I mean, look at Elvis. They only showed him from the waist up in his first TV appearance, right? Because they were worried his gyrating hips would excite people too much.
Not the open collar shirt.
No, that was fine. It was the hips they were worried about.
So I'm going to rephrase this question because we did talk about this on the phone.
Okay, that's fine.
But an interesting one that you actually told me today is the banning / challenging of the dictionary.
The dictionary, yes. Is the question like, what is the weirdest challenge or something?
No, it's, is it true Florida is considering editing the dictionary to make it less offensive?
I don't know about that. I cannot speak to that. But the dictionary has been banned or challenged. It was only banned, this is one school district in California in, I think, 2010 for 1 week. They banned the dictionary in a classroom because a kid in the classroom used it to look up a dirty word. And I think he read the dirty word in front of class, and parents freaked out and demanded the dictionary be removed from the shelves because they were worried it would inspire other kids to look up and read the definitions of dirty words. Now, other people realized how ridiculous that was, and that ban only lasted a week, but I think it's a great example of when people say, like, oh, what gets banned? Literally everything. Anything you could think of. It's not just books that are, books aren't trying to, brainwash kids one way or the other. The dictionary doesn't have a political agenda. The dictionary doesn't have a religious or social agenda. It is the dictionary.
It is a list of words.
It is a list of words and what they literally mean.
Mm-hmm. But that is the most interesting, especially considering when I was a child, I had difficulty spelling.
You mentioned that, yeah.
So that's impressive.
Here's our resource that we have to teach kids how to spell words, and we have to take it away, because what if they look up words we don't like?
Yeah. In which case, we could have different versions.
I mean, yeah, maybe we make a kid-friendly dictionary that doesn't have anything potentially offensive in it. But then that brings us back to one of the perennial questions of Banned Books Week: who gets to decide what's offensive?
I'm gonna change this question too.
Yeah.
But hey Nick, was the Bible ever banned in challenge?
Yes, it was. It was actually in the top 10 a few years ago. I can't remember which exactly, but it actually made it to the top 10. For violence, sex, and having a religious viewpoint. So, and that's just recently. Oh yeah, the Bible's been banned and challenged. I mean, if you want to go back to like ancient history, sure, early days of Christianity, absolutely. Christians were persecuted and executed all the time in ancient Rome. So certainly in those days, the Bible was banned and challenged. The Bible might be a good candidate for first book ever banned if we want to try to make educated guesses about it. But I'm sure there are ones earlier than that. I'm sure if you go back to ancient Egypt and ancient
Yeah.
Mesopotamia, there was stuff that the king didn't want you to read.
I have theories about Egypt. I think Egypt's where it started.
Potentially.
Because that's when paper really made its
Very true.
stance.
Debut, yeah.
Ooh, we have another long one, and it is the last question, too.
All right, last question.
Unless I throw in others. We kind of touched on this a little bit. Is it still important to teach classic literature that is racist and problematic when there are contemporary works to choose from instead? For example, Angie Thomas, The Hate You Give is often recommended by librarians instead of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, a novel we all know is from 1960 and however very much loved a novel it still is. It is known to perpetrate stereotypes.
So, I'm going to go to a frequently banned and challenged author here. I say yes. Yes is the short answer. But Mark Twain, a quote that I love from Mark Twain talks about what he calls the kaleidoscope of ideas, and I'm going to paraphrase because I'm not going to get it right. Twain argues that there's a finite number of ideas in the world, like the pieces of glass in a kaleidoscope. When you twist it, the way that those pieces of colored glass work together create an infinite number of constantly evolving patterns. And so the point of Twain saying this is that everything we do, like there's only, if you were to boil down all of literature to like its most basic elements, a lot of those would be the same. Books that are dramatically different from each other could be boiled down to the same like handful of elements. But what we get out of those elements is a constantly evolving process. And the stuff that might be problematic, might be outdated, might be frequently banned and challenged for a variety of reasons, is still important. That older, old dead white guy canon of literature. There's a reason we're still reading that goes beyond just it's what we've always done. There's a reason 500 years later we're still reading Shakespeare. Because it says something, it does something, and the list of authors who have been influenced by Shakespeare is impossible to comprehend. It's impossible to compile everything together that has been influenced by Shakespeare. So we could read these thousands and thousands of writers that have been influenced by Shakespeare, or we could read Shakespeare. These works have value. They have influenced and shaped the course of literature. And I think in that regard, yeah. I mean, there's way too many good books out there to read everything. So.
Unless we, and I'm not wishing this, end up in quarantine again. Just saying.
I think even then, because half the people in lockdown are going to be writing new books, so.
That's true. So, that was our last question.
Okay.
I guess we should end on the ultimate question. So we've talked about ban and challenge, but we've talked about the people who do ban and challenge. However, with us saying that and with us talking about the seriousness of it, are they still justified in their feelings of banning and challenge the book?
I think so. As I said, I like to believe, and I'm sure this is not true for everybody who issues a book challenge, but most of book challenges, as I mentioned, are targeted in public libraries and in schools, public and private. And they are usually done with at least under the guise. I won't go so far as to say that everybody who claims this is genuine in this concern. But they're at least done with the justification of, I am protecting children from objectionable material. Now that's fine. I would never presume to tell any parent what their kid can and can't be exposed to. That's an individual decision that a parent has to make. But where I take issue with it is, is somebody saying, I don't think my kid should read this, so therefore no kid should read this. That is the censorship that the ALA is trying to highlight. That is the issue that I think I as a librarian like to point out is that people are free to like and dislike whatever they want. I can't control that. I would never presume to control that. But if there is a book that you don't want to read, great. Don't read it. But I don't think that anybody should have, even me as a librarian, I don't have that authority. I don't think anybody should have the authority to presume to say what other people should and shouldn't read. Like, I've got Hemingway here. I love Ernest Hemingway. He's one of my favorite writers. For Whom the Bell Tolls is an absolutely brilliant book. I'm aware that a lot of people don't like Hemingway. I know that is an unpopular opinion. I have taught Hemingway in the past. You love him or hate him. I would never, outside of an English classroom when I assign it for an assignment, I would never force somebody else to read Hemingway. Because there's stuff in there that people might find objectionable. And that's fine. I happen to love it.
The same to be said of Sylvia Plath and the Bell Jar.
The same could be said of any piece of literature. You're never going to find a single work of literature that everybody likes. And that's fine. Just let other people enjoy what they enjoy without trying to take it away from them, I guess, is my ultimate lesson from Banned Book Week, I guess. Don't try to ruin somebody else's fun just because you don't like something.
Yeah. I think we can end there.
Okay.
So, let's say goodbye to the audience, imaginary audience.
Goodbye, imaginary audience. Definitely check out the library website, check out our research guides, check out the ALA's website, and if anybody out there ever wants to talk about banned and challenge books, I am always happy to do so.
Also, what is ALA before we type?
The American Library Association?
Yep.
I also want to say my very last thing. The whole reason that I have gone down this path, I have to plug. I have to give a big thank you here. The whole reason I went down this path of banned and challenge books, the whole reason I learned about Banned Book Week, is because of my undergraduate advisors. So Carol Peters, if you're out there, thank you so much. You are the reason I'm here right now.
And even so, we will send it to you.
This is fair.